So we're excited to be here. My name is Laura Maristani. I have my own technology startup called Catch. It's a skill tech company, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the work that we're doing. Really excited to host this conversation because we're really trying to bring different strategies and actual activities that communities can undertake to enable more inclusive technology economies. How do we leverage technology so that we can enable inclusion, so that we can enable belonging, and a lot of the other threads of conversations that we're having across the conference. I actually know Cordell from a very long time ago, was an initial supporter of the program back on day one when Cordell walked into my office and asked for support. So I'm very excited to see how the movement has progressed, and hopefully with the folks that we have here today, we can share some of the insights across different sectors. So this conversation is really focusing, I want you to take a lot of the perspective that we have gained through many of the sessions here has been very broad, right? So we're talking about problems from a macro perspective. We're talking about policy from a macro perspective. Now we're gonna really take it down. So I want you to think about your local community. I want you to think about not Silicon Valley, not New York City, but maybe a small town in the Midwest or Puerto Rico, where I am from, and really think through what are the things that are missing and what are the things that we can do to enable more inclusive communities, to empower communities, to create opportunity. I come from a technology company that was developing technology economies in underestimated areas. And for 2 years, I had the privilege of traveling the country and really looking at what are the essential blocks that a community needs for it to actually leverage technology to grow, to scale, to create opportunity for its people. And so the point of today's conversation is to share some of what we have seen across some of those sectors. So today we have Alexandre Rosin and Jorge Lima. I'll let them introduce themselves. As I said, my background is a little bit varied. I come from doing advocacy in DC, leading civil rights organizations, to being in philanthropy, where I was running a very easy strategy to figure out how to reduce hyperpartisanship in America, and then ended up in technology, where I was able to go in and actually do something about it. And so my technology startup Catch is meant to create opportunities to enable a skills-first approach to hiring, and to be able to create opportunity for folks at all levels to be able to transition into the careers that they want. And so I'll be talking a little bit from workforce as a pillar of how we generate opportunity in community, and obviously as an essential pillar. And I'll give some recommendations on how we've been doing that. So I'll pass it to Alexandre and then to Jorge to introduce themselves.
I'm Alex Rosin. I'm Brazilian born. Live in Washington, D.C. now. I'm going to try to bring perspectives here around the balancing of social, economic, prosper, and environment. I've been in the environmental field for 25 years. I have my own consultancy, and that's what I do. I had the opportunity to travel all around the world, including Brazil, and seen firsthand the duality of social and environment, and how these pulling and pushing forces need to balance themselves, and in particular how environmental justice is very lumped side for especially in Brazil, but all around the world.
Good afternoon. My name's Jorge Lima. Laura and Alex, it's a pleasure to be up here with you, and thank you all for taking the time to join this panel. I think we've doubled our audience size in just the last 2 minutes, so thank you. You're breaking records. So I am not in the tech field. But I decided to take Laura up on the invitation because I do work in philanthropy, and I think oftentimes we make the mistake of thinking of tech just as a separate sector and not as a tool that can actually enhance and scale all of the work that is being done in communities. And so for me, where I get to work at Stand Together, we focus on social entrepreneurs who are trying to fix the problems that they are closest to. And more often than not, they almost forget to ask the question of technology, forget to ask about the way that those in the tech sector could apply skills to their solutions and make their difference even bigger, even more scalable. So whether you're working with folks that are trying to change, policies in government or change anti-poverty work in different communities, or even in the business sector, small businesses that are trying to change their own community through business, I've seen the difference of when you can apply technology as a tool and not just as this sector or a different work sector. And so that's what I was hoping to share some examples of where we've seen that work show a lot of promise and impact.
So just kind of walking through for some of the new folks that came into the room, this is a conversation really of how do you take all of these big ideas and bring them to communities for real. All of us in one way, shape, or form are involved in advocacy. We are trying to create opportunity for our communities, but translating that often can get left behind because not all of us are experts in all the fields, right? So we may understand the issues from a big perspective. The goal here is really to talk about what's actionable and what we can take back. So I'll start with number one, and maybe use the example for those. How many of you in the room are from the US side? Okay, great. So in the United States, the Biden administration has approved a lot of regional programs to try to create technology economies outside of Silicon Valley. One of those programs is called the Tech Hubs program. And they're massive regional coalition building efforts to try to figure out how we bring technology opportunity, research, development. Basically, how do we move Silicon Valley from Silicon Valley and bring it to communities? Well, so what happens is that in a lot of those efforts, we end up designing for the big techie fish, right? And even here, we have big tech companies that are supporting and are speaking in different panels. Oftentimes, what happens is that a community will hear, hey, Google wants to do something here, or Amazon is bringing one of their facilities to the area, and all the workforce development strategies in that area focus on that. But then what happens? So you don't have workforce development that is actually looking at how do you build the infrastructure that your community needs. In a lot of these communities, you have small businesses that show up nowhere on the map. They're not even on Google Maps. They have no digital infrastructure. They're not using technology to manage their books, to manage their clients. So for those of us that are maybe in urban areas, it may seem unheard of. But when you travel to other cities outside of our comfort zones, you can very quickly feel what the lack of technology looks like. And how do you change that? You're not gonna have a bunch of engineers want to move into your community to work at that big facility or start to build chips in Ohio for Intel, right? Because there aren't the same kind of accommodations and things that we're used to having in areas where technology does exist, number one. But number two, it means that that community cannot scale because the small businesses don't have the right technologies. They're not anywhere near leveraging AI. We go to those places and folks would tell me, what do you mean you're bringing a tech hub here? I don't even know how to use my phone. So that is what most of the world actually looks like. And so it's important then to think through what are those basic structures that we have to put in place, and workforce development is obviously number one, but not in the traditional way. Because in fact, for technology, we can build a workforce relatively quickly for free and oftentimes paid. So important to think through as we are thinking about how do we build digital infrastructure in those communities, that the people from those communities are the ones in the best position to build it. But first we have to train them. And there are many opportunities to do that, not only by creating supportive wraparound services, making sure that moms don't have to leave their kids abandoned somewhere or spend extra money, but that there are childcare options for them when they're coming to learn, that they have paid opportunities to learn. There are many apprenticeship programs out there that end up with empty rooms. Because a lot of our communities and a lot of the organizations that you represent, you are the trusted partners that have to create that bridge for folks. You are the trusted partners that people are going to go to when they're looking for opportunity. And this is a big one, because you can go from having a salary of less than 25K, maybe working in retail, to earning 63K, being able to stay home, maybe rebuilding the website for your local school district, and then making it much more inclusive. Why? Because the single mom that understood how that website didn't work in the first place for her is now the one that is empowered to rebuild it. And so more of the approaches have to focus on those folks. That is the pathway. Then the engineers will come to work at the big techie firm that is coming to town. Those same folks are going to be the ones that have the basic capacities then to go into Intel or the big aerospace engineering firm or Google or Amazon or whatever technology company is coming to town. But in the meantime, they can start building websites for micro businesses, for small businesses, websites that allow them to grow and scale and improve their communities. So that's really important. And then thinking outside the box. The traditional pathway, typically when we're building strategies, is always, where do I find the 18-year-old that can learn how to code? I put them either through community college, right? If I find a coding camp here and there, and then I certify them, and I look at certifications and degrees. But the future is skills first. And so in a lot of these roles, we actually do not need to have certifications and degrees. They're obsolete in many cases because a lot of them can't move and build curriculum fast enough to keep up with AI. I mean, with AI and technology, just think about ChatGPT and how quickly we all kind of understood what it was doing and are now bridging and understanding its ability and its capacity and how fast it's moving. The majority of universities are still trying to figure out what the curriculum needs to look like. So making sure that there are programs in those communities that can train quickly and upskill folks and reskill folks and are not only looking at youth, but are looking at the whole gamut. The 40-year-old mom that can come back and have a fresh career, the 65-year-old that is at home and wants to do something new, and find ways for that community to come back and ultimately to belong. So that's, I think, one of the key pillars that we wanted to bring. And as we're continuing down in the conversation, I really want Alexandre to dig into, as now we have this, let's say, we did it, right? We have all these technologists out there. They're building technology like crazy. It's awesome. Our technologies are scaling. But guess what? There are environmental impacts with that. So, Ale, what do we do?
I'm going to try to follow Laura. She's pretty awesome. That's why I decided to join her here. But let me put a perspective now on the environment. This, as I was saying before, as you progress and build and develop, there's going to be a growth in social and economic values, but it will also impact the environment. We're going to start making bigger footprints on the environment that we are. There's even issues with displacement. The place now that used to be your park is no more. The place that you used to even live is no more. And having that understanding up front of this fast expansion and using technology to optimize the use of space is very important. What I have seen is that eventually what happens is there is a tendency, and it's even in policy, that the justice happens to progress that is not for the community, is for that company that is coming in. In our first session today, We're hearing about, getting together, advocacy and so forth. I think if we take anything from being together here is find each other's name, know who everyone is, because that's the key. And Jorge will talk more about policies and things like that, but eventually in your community, the environment is going to be one of those entries there that you're going to have to discuss. The big companies will try to use the law, like I said, to push their agenda using the environment as progress, while using the same argument to say that's why we need to change what your community look like and so forth. We are using more resources for decades now, and we have not grown in efficiency as we should and would have because of some of the policies that are in place. There's still a lack of understanding that the biggest community we have is this planet, and we're trying to go to Mars for some reason and putting billions behind it. In the U.S., the movement on environmental justice has picked up. It is important to be at the table, and the same way that administrations have put money to develop social side and tech and so forth, they have put money on the environmental side. So there is a lot of resource in the form of money or incentives to also bring to the table and the communities and prepare for this growth. Growth is not bad, but if it's not planned or structured, you eventually, the mess that we are already. I'll leave a few things, do's and don'ts. It's important, like I said, to get together, to have a plan, to basically bring the community together and have a seat at the table. So you have to look for representation. The other thing is it is important to understand the interdependency of communities. We're talking about small communities, but the environment has bigger footprints. So when you're looking at your side, you might think that that power plant out in Ohio, Pico, Ohio 2, is, not in my backyard, but it's in someone's backyard. So understanding how your progress is happening, you have to think bigger, because it might be at a cost of another community. What we've seen in the US, here in Brazil, is that this privilege, or it's lump side, like I said, you use communities that have no voice to place that power plant. So the communities that have representation can use that energy, clean or not. And then you put a windmill in the communities that are not privileged to feel good. So that there's one windmill here, but it's burning and destroying the other communities. And be at the table to write legislation and law. So I think with that, I'll transition to Jorge, that has that background on policy, but it's important to be with the pen in the hand, so to change that.
And I think also to just wrap that up, and we'll get to ask, obviously, questions, because there's a lot of knowledge in here that we can access. But again, as you're kind of building that opportunity, you're thinking about strategy for your communities. How are you going to create opportunity? How are you going to grow? How are you going to bring technology? The spillover effects into absolutely everything that happens, right? So Alexandra maybe later can talk through, what happens when you start storing stuff in the cloud and what that does to electricity in your community and how it raises prices, all these different things. Just important to think. We often leave the conversation about environmental sustainability to when we have a problem instead of when we're building the solution. So part of it is, as we're thinking about that stack, think about the solution, having that embedded already. And Jorge, I'm really excited to have here. Obviously, Jorge comes from, supporting entrepreneurs and create different ways of thinking about how do you create opportunities for communities. So, Jorge.
Yeah, happy to. So one of the things we believe in is just the important role that innovation is going to actually play in creating this future where it's more inclusive, more belonging, right? These are not concepts, technology and innovation are not concepts that we should wait for them to come to a community, right? We want the communities to embrace it and to feel that they could use those things as tools as they are solving their problems. And what we're realizing more often than not, and many of you in this audience will already know that these audiences are early adopters. They probably know more of these things and have found different ways to use the technology, that it's really the archaic systems that haven't caught up, right? We talk about the need for people who code and different folks in the tech field. Many of the children with the iPhone that have been using it for a long time, regardless of what community in, they know more than anyone who's going to go get certified by some sort of institution down the road. That, to your point earlier, they don't even know yet with the ChatGPT and the acceleration that's coming with AI, what that's going to do to their certification cases, because the people who presumably would be the audience for those certifications know more than the people creating the curriculum at the moment, right? Because they have access to this now because they have found ways to access this technology early on. So again, we look for ways for technology, to your point, to be part of the solution early on. It's not a industry that we're waiting, that's only one solution that can come to a community. That can happen across the board. And so I'll give you some examples of what do I mean. One of the issues that I get the privilege to work on back in the United States is immigration. And unfortunately, we still don't have a solution to the Dreamers situation. But when looking at that problem, there was obviously a lot of groups that were invested in the advocacy work, a lot of groups that were working in the community and support work that happens with Dreamers and the communities that were involved. And there was one group that was thinking about the technology side of it. What if we are wildly successful and got all of the Dreamers, the status that many of us were hoping that they would get in the United States? All of those, potentially million plus Dreamers would have to now enter a very archaic system. They would all need a lawyer to navigate things. And there was one tech community that was like, we want to solve that ahead of time. I'm not the tech guy, so I'm going to be very oversimplistic here, but they were like the TurboTax for the Dreamer process. And right now they help a lot of those who still qualify for DACA to get through DACA, but they've really built the infrastructure so that the day that Congress catches up and can give Dreamer status, the Dreamers don't need to go find an individual lawyer for each of them. There is a system that is much more modern, much more efficient. Of course, some of them may still need lawyers, and there's a way for that process to develop. But again, the point here is how technology could be part of the broader solution. Now in the immigration space, you have people talking about technology in a way that they weren't before, right? Because that was something, I do immigration, I don't do technology. No, technology can be part of your solution. Another one that was fascinating to us was when we were trying to understand the issue of housing. Which again, US-based, still a big problem that we're facing. But one interesting story comes out of Austin, Texas. We were working with a nonprofit that really helped those that are currently without homes, currently without jobs. They provided community by providing housing, but they were really lacking the housing units themselves. We had a local government who wanted to help, but again, they didn't know how to actually provide the units. And then there was a technology company that was looking at printing 3D houses. So it used a massive 3D cement printer. The three of those entities had not spoken. They hadn't connected, and we were able to convene them. And right now in Austin, there's a community called Farmer Loaves and Fishes, I believe is the name of the community, who have 3D printed houses for the individuals that they are serving. And these are individuals who are not waiting for something to come to them. They're actually early adopters. There's people who want to come see their houses, right? So they went from not having a home to being at the leading edge of this technology. And again, it's just to me a very exciting opportunity to see that technology is not this thing that will happen to them. It is something that they can adopt and can be on the leading edge. And actually, when applied, can really help the social sector increase the effect and the impact that they have. We've seen other examples, of course. I think entrepreneurship is a huge one where you can see this, right? We're not just talking about tech startups, but how do you help mom and pop shops understand the use of technology for things like their everyday finance operations, their HR operations? And the added benefit is not only that they are finding an ease through which to do that in their work. But now technology, again, does not become this thing that will happen to them, that will disrupt them. It is something that they have grown more familiar with. They can be part of whatever solution, as Laura said, comes to their communities when technology is informed more, or informs more of what they are doing.
Yeah. So this session is as much about, right, how we're kind of doing the work that we're trying to do to support communities. But guess what? Belonging begins with us. And so I know a lot of folks in the room are social entrepreneurs. And part of what I'd like folks to leave with as well is to look at the work that is very close to you. Because oftentimes we're having these big conversations. And it can feel, right, advocacy takes a long time. It doesn't mean that we're not going to do it. But you know what's hard? If we're not doing it in our organizations on a day-to-day, it's very difficult to externalize it. So thinking through, how are you hiring folks? How are you thinking about upskilling, reskilling folks in your communities? How are you thinking about your environmental sustainability strategy? What kind of impact or effect your work could be having on the local environment? And as Alexandre said, further. And then thinking through how your work is helping to support entrepreneurship, is actually helping to bridge to a lot of the folks in the surrounding areas of your organization, of your work, to be able to leverage technology. Again, I think we so often focus on the problem as this big thing. And we also have, how many of you, let me kind of take a step back and say, how many of you work at nonprofit organizations? Private sector? Okay. So in different ways, right, we have the capacity, we have the power. We may not always feel that we do, because we have bureaucracies and all these other things that we have to deal with. But there are things close to us that we can do, whether it's supporting organizations. When you're supporting organizations, really looking at what it is that they're doing and how they're doing it. Because, if they have a shitty executive director, they're probably not externalizing good things into the world. And it's in those spaces, it actually are those smaller things are the things that build up and create more inclusive communities and create communities where folks feel like they belong. If I feel like I don't belong at work, I'm gonna have a hard time belonging in my community, right? So what are specific things that you would recommend to the folks in the room quickly before we open it up for questions that they should be doing on a day-to-day, not only to, again, think through how do we enable more access to technology, meaningful access to technology in our day-to-day, in our advocacy, in the work that we're doing, but also in their organizations.
First of all, I would recommend that they understand basically the rules of the game around you. And if the rules don't work for you, that's when you go to the table and change. There's a lot that has been already set that is good, but if you are ignorant to those rules, then you won't use it. And applying that to environment, there's piles of environmental laws and regulations and things like that that help or can not help. So understanding that would be crucial. I think it's important to understand, like I said before, that in the dimensions of the environment, your local community is but one local community, and even if it's at the company level, there's many others. So understanding how your impact translates into someone else's or another community impact, very important. I think finally is, again, I'll go back to the first meeting, is connect. So it is important to have a network. It is important for you to, these movements, I can speak on the environment, only happened because a lot of people got together and pushed an agenda. And if you using technology to optimize things doesn't mean that you're optimizing the environment. So you have to think that, broader, like the example that Laura is saying, it's like our technology is creating different footprints. We're changing, before, when I started working, it was, we shouldn't be printing. The printings went away. Now we're storing massive amounts of data, massive. And they go into the storage, and you imagine how many cat photographs are stored somewhere that we're paying for that with the environment. We're generating that just to store that in a server somewhere. Before it was a piece of paper, so we cut a few trees. It just changed. So understanding these interlinks, and I'm not sure what the next wave is, but we're very due for a energy revolution, because first of all, our energy sources are too dirty. They cannot sustain what we need to do for the next jump. So we're at capacity. Otherwise, we need to go back to coal for the next wave. And then that's why you understand other less developed societies wanting to tap on coal because it's cheap and available, and is this is the accelerator part. So thinking of kind of how these interconnect would be what I would leave with you.
The risk of sounding very simplistic, but this is how my brain works, right? So we want very clear next steps. There's three things that I think work very well when an organization or a social entrepreneur wants to do this. One, be very clear on the problem you're trying to solve. Oftentimes, that's where mistake number one, like using my own example, I want to fix immigration. What do you mean, right? Like there's a lot of things there. What is the problem that you want to solve, and how do you think you can contribute to that, right? What is it that you bring to the table? The second part is, if you're clear on the problem you're trying to solve, then just make sure you ask the question, can technology help? Can technology actually play a role in solving the problem that we have now articulated? And then the third step that I would say is know when to get out of the way. Because at least from the philanthropy world, I can tell you how many times I think I have to be involved in all of the steps, when really, if I am the convener, perhaps it's the tech expert and then the people that are actually living with the problem, they can have a much better conversation than I can ever hope to translate between the two of them, right? So what is it the problem I'm trying to solve? Can technology provide a way to help solve it? And then third, get out of the way and let it happen if you're able to get to that point. But those are three things. When we do them consciously and do them more often, we start to see people actually talk about solutions and get results.
Awesome. Well, in case it wasn't immediately obvious, you have a lot of strategists on this panel from a lot of different sectors. So all questions are fair game. Obviously, we don't have a lot of time to dig into all the different things that we're working on individually and the partnerships and groups that we get to engage with. But we wanted to be able to bring a little bit of what we're seeing, because oftentimes, like I said, we get stuck in our urban areas and our jobs or our organizations or our advocacy issue. And it's hard to see what's actually happening in community, even though the work that we're doing is meant to support those folks, right? So how do we bring it a little bit back to that and talk about solutions, a little bit less about the problems and more about the potential solutions. So thanks again for coming by. And like I said at the beginning, sorry for my voice. Something is not agreeing with my body and Rio. So any questions? Any thoughts? I mean, it's a small group. You can jump in. If you want to share your own work, you're welcome to do that as well. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, one thing that stood out to me during the conversation is technology has a lot of potential to make things easier or, to facilitate. But it also has the potential to maybe hide some of the costs. You mentioned the environment, for example, storing all of our photos online. You don't see the stacks of paper or the trees that you've cut down, but there's still an environmental cost there. How do you make sure that when you're talking about kind of integrating technology, that you are having those kind of pros and cons, right? Like, how do you make sure that that conversation is being carried forward in a way that allows you to actually weigh the different options and to figure out, like, is pulling in some sort of technological solution actually the best way forward?
I'll take it. Yeah. That's a great question. So I think we tend to work in silos, so you tend to isolate yourself and only think of the problem from one angle. Having this diverse thoughts and bringing even like I was saying, diverse communities in is some of the ways that you can start thinking outside of the box, the proverbial outside of the box. A lot of these hidden costs, like the hidden costs, sometimes even in these groups are not obvious. So it's important to, when you set what your goal is, to understand risks and impacts ahead and monitor. So there is potential for this, but monitoring, put some kind of sensing out there to look for that issues. There are sometimes what I've seen is some of these technologies pick up so fast that the magnitude of the impact is also missed. So you're saying, when I put this in, this is the impact. This is going to be 3 people. No, it's 3 million people. Oh, hold on, 3 billion people. It's, it's the cat's out of the box at that point. It's transparency also works. So having communicate what your intent is and what you're trying to do goes a long way. It's like a lot of especially international banks and stuff like that, they do outreach. They try to listen to, we're going to do this. There might be impacts. What do you see? Because you'll get good feedback there. So those are a few ideas that I've seen even a few in practice, but having that conversation in people that it's pulling your 5-year-old kid and asking, explaining to them, and they're going to just destroy you with whys. I think that's what you're looking for there. So
I think we have a lot of expertise in this conference from a lot of different sectors, right? And we talk a lot about making sure that we are collaborating, that we're learning from each other. Continuing to do that is obviously important. Learning from each other's communities is a big part of that. I would caution though, because I think in that same thread where we aim to collaborate, and I'll give a specific example. I used to work closely with Latino elected officials. And these were state legislators, members of Congress. There was a fad during a time where they would all share legislation. So they were sharing what each of them wrote in Florida, in Arizona. So the guy from Arizona would call the guy in Florida, hey, send me your bill that you wrote. And that's a big problem, because at that point, you think you're collaborating, but you're not really bringing in the necessary voices to make sure that that is reflective and that it is impacting your community the way that it needs to impact it. So I would say it's collaboration and knowing who to bring in and knowing who to pull in. Unfortunately, because our communities are underrepresented in almost every field, it's sometimes hard to create a very collaborative, inclusive group of folks that could have maybe an Alexandre at the table that has so many years in ESG and make the effort, but don't also assume that what worked in one place is gonna work in your community, and absolutely don't just take that footprint in the way that it was developed for somebody else and try to automatically, bring it to your community, because we see a lot of that, especially when it gets complicated. We see it, Alexander talked about it in the environmental sustainability space. We see it in the workforce development space. We see it in democracy. And in particular with issues of democracy, we saw that back during the Obama years, right, talking about technology, there was a lot of conversation around the potential of technology, what that was going to do, all the great things, all the awesome things. And you know what it did? I did a lot of polling around this. It actually created a lot of anxiety. And so a lot of communities in Middle America started flipping out because they were seeing transitioning economies, and what they're hearing everywhere is technology is coming for you. It's coming for your job, when that's not what was actually happening. But at that point, it's hard to bring people back in because they don't see opportunity for themselves. And it's a little bit of that back and forth, the challenge with creating that collaborative space and, moving around what works in one place into another without taking into consideration the societal dynamics in those places. I think we can take one more, or if you all have any closing thoughts. I already had Cordell coming.
Hola. No, primero que todo, solo hablo español.
Está bien, yo hablo español, no te preocupes.
Okay.
Adelante. Todo el mundo aquí habla español.
Ok, bueno, en Colombia estamos desarrollando una plataforma que busca conectar la oferta del mercado laboral con profesionales afrocolombianos, porque, somos profesionales con maestrías, pero para encontrar empleos que realmente nos generen un bienestar y una calidad de vida es complicado. Y lo que estamos haciendo en la creación de esta plataforma es precisamente con la historia de vida de casi 3,000 profesionales afrocolombianos. Estamos montando para entender cuáles son las barreras que tienen ellos, y desde las barreras que tienen ellos también entender a los empresarios en términos de por qué no contratan a la población afrocolombiana. Entonces hemos hecho ahí llevamos como 2 años entre diagnósticos para poder crear esta plataforma, y me llama la atención porque muchas de las cosas que alcancé a entender, ya hay tecnología desarrollada para eso, ya la inteligencia artificial ha avanzado, sobre todo en términos, por ejemplo, de fortalecer ciertas habilidades que requiere el mercado laboral, pero también de entender en dónde están, cómo podemos identificar o predecir muchos de los comportamientos que llevan a que la población afrocolombiana, una vez entra a laboral, como que se salga, no duran ni 1 ni 2 semanas en los puestos. Entonces, como si eso ya está, ¿cómo podríamos nosotras como hacer a eso para fortalecer nuestro modelo?
Okay. Vamos a hablar, cuando salgamos yo hablo contigo para exchange información, y yo te puedo dar varias ideas porque mi compañía de tecnología en parte eso es lo que hace. So, just for everybody else, she's building a really awesome initiative in Colombia to help support Afro-Colombian communities in accessing employment. And so she was asking about opportunities to exchange information with folks who may know how to do that in better ways. So if you have anything for her, please share.
Podemos hablar después también, pero para mí el ejemplo que se me recuerda de parte del trabajo que hacemos en los Estados Unidos no es la misma población, pero había un esfuerzo grande para ayudar a esos que estaban, que eran parte de how do you say formerly incarcerated?
De la comunidad.
Que las compañías no sabían cómo accesar a esa población para que ellos trabajaran, y lo mismo con los refugiados que están llegando a los Estados Unidos, que muchas veces vienen con muchos diferentes niveles de educación, pero es algo en las compañías, y ahí nos estamos enfocando, no sé si es lo que ya estás haciendo tú también, en lo que es los departamentos de recursos humanos, porque esos son los primeros que miran los resumes y lo primero que empiezan a revisar por qué un empleado no está logrando. Y a lo mejor ya ellos tienen la posición para poder ayudar a los empleados que están ahí quedarse, y ellos son los que piensan, bueno, el empleado está teniendo una experiencia diferente que no es el típico de nuestros empleados y cómo le podemos cambiar esa expresión para que ellos se queden con nosotros. Pero hay diferentes programas que no son exactamente como el que estás hablando, pero en los Estados Unidos hay muchos diferentes organizaciones que están hablando y pensando de lo mismo que tú. La pregunta que es la misma, ¿cómo es que los empleados no están mirando el potencial de diferentes poblaciones que ellos nunca han tratado de comunicarse para quedarse con ellos?
And in summary, for the folks that don't speak Spanish, basically, if you're looking at issues on hiring, look at the employer side at their HR departments. Because usually the process that they have in place is what is keeping people out or making people leave. So anyway, we'll be around, and we're so grateful that you hung out for us for a little bit. I know it's late. We'll see you around, and thank you again.